Thank you, Dr. Bjoraker. Thank you so much.
But if you have any questions, I'll be here. I didn't want to speed through this because we're running short.
A lot of important information in Dr. Bjoraker's certainly an expertise in these topics, and so please feel free to find her, as she had mentioned. Our next speaker, Melissa Hogan, is the president of Project Alive. She's a former corporate attorney and strategy consultant. Melissa's life changed when her son Case was diagnosed with Hunter syndrome in 2009. She now serves as the president of Project Alive, a Hunter syndrome research and advocacy foundation, and also acts as an FDA patient representative and advisory board member for the Mayo Clinic Social Media Network and on the corporate and foundation alliances for global genes. Melissa is considered a leading expert on clinical trials for neurodegenerative diseases, advising on the design of the clinical trials for Hunter syndrome around the world. In her work with Project Alive, Melissa has spearheaded creative and award-winning campaigns for Hunter syndrome awareness and fundraising, including viral videos, a documentary series, and even an original song she wrote called Alive. Project Alive is currently funding and anticipating 2018 enrollment for the Phase 1/2 gene therapy clinical trial for Hunter syndrome. Melissa's passion is a writer, and she is currently writing 2 books, one on pediatric medical trauma with leading researcher and one on advocating for a child with a complex medical condition. She writes at melissahogan.com, and I consider Melissa a dear friend, so thank you for being here.
Thank you, Terry. I'm exhausted now just hearing that stuff. Thank you. So as Terry said, I'm Melissa Hogan, and really I'm just here like a lot of you because I'm a mom. I'm a mom to a beautiful son who was diagnosed with Hunter syndrome in 2009, and you may have seen him running around here in Santa pajamas most of the time. So, as Terry said, I'm the president of Project Alive, but and in a number of other roles, but all my comments here today will be in a personal capacity. And it's funny because sitting up here with this panel, I feel like life comes full circle because connections to all of these people. So after my son was diagnosed, I took him to Dr. Bjoraker in Colorado to help with his IEP. And writing these 2 books are very along the lines of what she speaks about. And then I know Dr. Gray because I met Lori Sames, and she's a friend of mine and a mentor of mine, I think back in 2012. And since we've both been working on gene therapy, I've been in constant communication with her, and that's how I met Dr. Gray. And then Dr. Harmatz here talking about post hoc analysis of clinical trials. That's an area we're specifically working on with respect to our own analysis of our data in the Shire intrathecal trial. So again, it feels very full circle to be up here. So just a little bit of our story. Like I said, my son was born in 2007 and was in the NICU and on a ventilator, and those were his first symptoms of Hunter syndrome. But they said, of course, he's healthy, take him home, he's gonna do great. And I had 3 little kids at home. I had 3 boys in 3 years, and so it was overwhelming. And I didn't see all of these little signs that started accumulating. But luckily, my mom is an RN, and luckily she likes TV, because she watched Mystery Diagnosis, and miraculously it was about a boy with Hunter syndrome, the Townsley family in Florida who have now lost their son, and she diagnosed my son in 2009 before a physician ever would have. So we were very blessed in that way, but as a lot of you know, decline in Hunter syndrome for the severe form happens at different stages, but we started to see that when my son was 3 years old. So you can see here he was in a wheelchair with a 6-point harness because that was really the only way he could get infusion or function. But then, new therapies started to come about. And even more now, but specifically the intrathecal clinical trial with Shire, and we thought this is groundbreaking. This is the new day in Hunter syndrome and for a lot of the MPSs for these new trials. And what that means, though, is that we were all on a different course or a unique course for our own kids. Some transplant, ERT, different stages, different countries, different access to things. But now that there's new therapies coming about, that complexity also meets divergence, and our courses in our past become even more unique. But one thing we want to remember is we are all looking at the same mountain, and we might be at different points, different sides of the mountain, but to me, that mountain is a long and fulfilling life for my son and for our family, and I know that's what everybody else wants too. So looking at it that way, here's a little more background about me, but I will say that my most proud role, other than being the parent to my kids, was when I got to take Case to meet one of his heroes, Charles Barkley, who he calls Sparkly. And if you've never stood in a room with Shaquille O'Neal, who's, like 7 foot something, and a little boy calling Charles Barkley Sparkly, it is one of the greatest feelings. So, there's just experiences like that I think we have to appreciate that we've been given with this disease. So one of my second great passions, besides taking my son to meet basketball players that he loves, are 2 projects that I would be remiss if I didn't mention as part of this that we're really proud of and have been huge collaborators are here with us at this conference. And that is starting in 2012, conversations with the people who became the leadership of Project Alive with Dr. Fu and Dr. McCarty to take work that Dr. Fu and Dr. Munzer had done in gene therapy and move that forward for Hunter syndrome. And so that happened, and preclinical, and then moving into the clinical stage. And I'll forgive Dr. Whitley that he didn't mention our gene therapy program when he was up here the other day, but we now have manufactured vector and have an open IND for a phase 1/2 clinical trial at Nationwide Children's Hospital. And we're just so grateful for the long years of work of Dr. Munzer, Dr. Fu, and Dr. McCarty, and hope to see that start enrolling in 2018. But on the flip side of that, as part of this complex journey, we also are trying to move every therapy forward, and that relates to even specifically my story in terms of the looking at situations like what happened with the data in the Shire intrathecal trial, and as Dr. Harmatz alluded to, doing some post hoc analysis of some of our own data collection and figuring out how that happened, but also where those signals are that patients are seeing. And I think that's so important, that if you believe in something, to really look at the science, because the FDA likes the science, and really be able to understand and move forward with scientific based evidence, especially with the regulatory agencies. So since we're talking about the complex journey of MPS II, of course, there's a clear and simple answer that I can give in the 20 minutes that I'm up here, and no. Because every journey is so unique, I just want to touch on a couple things that I've seen are challenges for a lot of the families in the MPS II space. And really, what I'd like to do is just ask you to kind of stop and reframe how you look at your journey with MPS II or different MPS or ML, and who can tell me where this is going? Anyone? If you're from the 80s like me and you're in the US, I know somebody knows the answer. Collaborate and listen. Stop. Collaborate. Okay, I'm from the 80s. Don't make fun of me. I mean, come on. But it's just really important because collaborating together as communities around the world and across diseases and listening to one another is really important to help us all move forward. So this is kind of the framework I think about in terms of managing the journey that we are on, whether it's MPS II or any of the other MPSs. And I say I'm a hat collector. I have a bunch of hats. And sometimes it's helpful to think of them very distinctly, because we think of managing our child's illness, or if you're an affected person yourself, your own illness, and we think it's all about the illness and the health aspects of that. But really, it's about each of these. And if we forego one in favor of the other, I think we won't get to that mountain we actually seek, which is that long and fulfilling life. We might get there, but we will have sacrificed a lot of things in the process. So as part of being, when I say my health CEO for my son, there's a lot of things that we have to assemble, and that's our own expertise in the disease. It's, our plans of, well, what do we do if he develops carpal tunnel syndrome, or if he needs a shunt? Who are my team members? How do we be proactive, as well as sometimes, reactive if something unexpected happens? So that's part of being that healthcare CEO. And so we all know, at least with respect to MPS II, what the disease looks like in the severe form, and then, in some of these or along the continuum to the attenuated form. So none of these are a surprise to any of you. But I just wanted to touch on a couple of these that we've seen that are important, that I've seen people struggle with. And that is, in terms of carpal tunnel syndrome, making sure that you either talk with, or most importantly, go see an expert who has experience with carpal tunnel syndrome in MPS, and those surgeries in MPS. Because, your local hand surgeon may not go deeply enough into being able to take out those deposits in a way that will prevent, the recurrence pretty quickly. Compromised airway, I think, we're all familiar with that. This is the one that I've seen the greatest struggle, at least in the MPS II community. And something, again, I'm speaking as a mom and as a person that I've seen, and not as a medical professional, but I think it's fair to say that in MPS II, it is almost assured that these kids develop high intracranial pressure over time. They really do. And it would be the exception for them not to. And I've seen so many parents still struggle with physicians saying, well, their MRI looks okay. And I'm here to tell you that it is almost the rule that the MRI will not tell you there is high intracranial pressure, that a lumbar puncture is the way to be able to tell. And just kid after kid having beautiful MRIs and going in and having a lumbar puncture and intracranial pressure of 50 and 60, which is really high. So if I could just urge you to, if that's a concern of yours, or you want to learn more, to talk to other people in the community who I know are here, who have expertise in that area. Sleep apnea, just the importance of sleep studies. And they're so hard and they're so taxing, but getting those on a periodic basis, because you just don't want to be at a point where you all of a sudden realize there's severe sleep apnea, and figuring out what to do. The behaviors. Obviously, that's such a big area. And I know people in our community have looked at ABA therapy and have had some success with that, some success with CBD, whether that's CBD with or without THC. Sensory diets, which is the use of sensory input activities in order to calm them, and some with certain medications. So I think exploring all of those with your individual situation is important. And then progressive loss of skills. I think that's really just the science and the research that I think is really exciting, that hopefully will help as many kids as possible address that really core challenge of the severe form. So the second hat, like I said, is an advocate. And that term, dragon mom, or dragon dad, if you're not familiar with that, is from an essay from the New York Times, I think in 2012 or 2011, called Notes from a Dragon Mom. And I'm just going to read a short piece of it here. This was a Tay-Sachs mom, and she wrote this. She said, "My son won't prosper or succeed in the way we have come to understand this term in our culture. He will never walk or say mama. I will never be a tiger mom. The mothers and fathers of terminally ill children are something else entirely. Our goals are simple and terrible: to help our children live with minimal discomfort and maximum dignity. We will not launch our children into a bright and promising future, but see them into early graves. We will prepare to lose them and then impossibly to live on after that gutting loss. This requires a new ferocity, a new way of thinking, a new animal. We are dragon parents, fierce and loyal and loving as hell. Our experiences have taught us how to parent for the here and now, for the sake of parenting, for the humanity implicit in the act itself, though this runs counter to the traditional wisdom and advice." I love that article. It was terrible to read. And it was gut-wrenching, and I was on the floor of my hotel room in a clinical trial when I first read it. And I diverge with the writer Emily in the respect that, sadly, in her case, there wasn't an option for her child who did pass away. But we're starting to see options for our kids. And so I take that dragon parent aspect to all of these areas for my son, and as I hope you'll do for your kids as well, whether it's in the medical field or their education, and using that ferocity to take their voice and get them the life that we know they deserve in each of those areas. And then, caregiver. So I think a lot of us think of caregiver in the terms of the medical context. I'm getting them the care that they need. But as you heard from Dr. Bjoraker, Kendra, I always do that to your name, over here, it's really a different thing. The caregiver is caring in a number of different ways for your affected child, but also for yourself, for their siblings, for your spouse if you're married, for your friends, and it's a two-way street, because you would hate to get to the top of that mountain where your child gets a cure and a long life, and you are alone, and your child has medical trauma, and you're estranged from your other children, and you're divorced, and you're lonely. And so, to me, this is such a hat that's often ignored, and I ignored it for many years, I'll be honest. And but it's so important as a balance to all of those other things that we're working on. And specifically, one of the areas that is a passion of mine and that Kendra touched on is pediatric medical trauma or medical traumatic stress. And if you're not familiar with that, that is like PTSD from medical events. And my son suffers severely from that, and that's that anxiety and going through a lot of that. And I watched a lot of kids, and that's a huge issue in our community right now. And that's why I'm working with a researcher on a book about that. But just really looking at these and how you can best set yourself and your child and your family up for success, and not ignoring all of this in favor just of the medical aspects. Because, you know, if we're climbing a mountain, or if we're running this marathon and all we do is think about the shoes, the medical side, you know, we're going to get to the finish line and we're going to be naked and cold and alone. And so, you know, let's run together and work on all of these aspects and support one another, because we're all in this together. Whether it's people on different parts of the mountain and on different treatments or different trials that we hope exist and come to fruition, or different aspects of MPS. You know, like somebody said, I hope we're in a family reunion where our kids and our adults are treated and we can celebrate. But even if it takes a long time to get there, looking at all of these together, we just want to be climbing that mountain together. So, thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Our next speaker is Carl Kapes. He is a board member of the Team San Filippo Foundation, and he also has two children with MPS 3, Bryce and Brooklyn. Wait, I said that wrong. I'll let you finish.
No, yeah. My name's Carl Kapes. I have two children who have Sanfilippo type A, Ryan, who's 13, and Braden, who's 10.
Thank you, and I just wanted to say. Thank you. I just wanted to say that Carl's also a long time and a good friend. Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to, you know, certainly thank Terry and the National MPS Society for giving me, you know, the opportunity to share my journey here. I mean, I'm really appreciative of that, and I'm honored to be able to share the stage with these amazing professionals, researchers, doctors, and even families. So this is an amazing opportunity, and I'd also like to thank Terry and the MPS Society for hosting this event and providing, you know, us the opportunity to come together and collaborate and work and learn, and that's very important in our journey with trying to conquer these diseases and trying to move forward. So this is this really helps us progress, these forums like this. And when I get into my slides, I'll talk about, you know, an opportunity that we had at a conference like this where we met, you know, a researcher who today now we have a clinical trial based on a meeting like that. So these meetings are so important. I do realize I'm standing between everyone and lunch here, so I only have a few slides, so I'll try to get through them as quick as I can, but I do hope that you find my, the stuff that I go over useful. I'm just going to talk about a few things. As Terry mentioned, I am on the Team Sanfilippo Foundation, so I'll just talk to you a little bit about that. I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about the stages of the disease, which, again, I'll kind of tell you why it's very important. And then, my experience as a father of two sons who have MPS III, just how, the experiences I have, again, as a dad, not as a doctor, not as a researcher, not as a scientist, but as a dad, trying to manage these symptoms and hopefully delay, the impacts and progression so that we can get my children, get all our children to, a treatment or hopefully one day a cure. So the Team Sanfilippo Foundation, we were founded in 2009 by Kathleen Buckley. There was a need at that time for Sanfilippo MPS type 3. There wasn't a lot of research going on. Earlier in the day, Michelle Berg talked about the Children's Medical Research Foundation. So, they were one of the only ones that were really kind of pushing MPS type 3, and we just kind of felt that there was a need to really, focus in on that and start to move, science and technology and treatments to try and get these kids something that can help them. The one big thing about Team Sanfilippo is we focus on, all the children and all the stages. And that's kind of the crux that we're up against today is, you heard a lot of companies talk about the different trials that are out there, the different clinical trials that are starting, all the research that's going on. But the reality of this is a lot of these trials are designed for younger children. So we've been working on these treatments and fundraising and doing all this stuff for years and years and years. And, there's a lot of older kids that need these treatments as well. So, how do we bridge that gap of, we obviously want to treat everyone. The younger kids are going to get into these trials. You get diagnosed today, most likely you're probably going to get into a trial. But, what do we do for these older children? And that's really important now as Team Sanfilippo shifts our focus to, okay, let's work on some of these older children. So one of the big things that we worked on that I want to talk about is we did what's called Abiona's Phase 1B. And what that is really structured for is treating older children with the gene therapy that Abiona talked about today. So, again, it's not written in their IND on Phase 1 and 2 that they're only treating younger children, but we all know that with younger children, it's easier to measure endpoints. So it's easier for them to get that clinical trial and get that medicine to the market by proving that it works. I mean, that's what that's what all the companies are up against, is proving that what they're doing works, proving that gene therapy works. So naturally, it's easier to show the FDA and get approval in the younger children that it's working. So we got together with a lot of foundations worldwide, and even some here in the United States. I specifically want to mention the Stop Sanfilippo Foundation, which is in Spain. We got together with Stop Sanfilippo and other foundations from Australia, from Mexico, Children's Medical Research Foundation, which we talked about here in the United States, of course, the National MPS Society, and we basically said, okay, we got a trial going, we're treating younger kids, how do we treat the older kids? So we worked with Dr. Tim Miller at Abiona, and we actually signed a $14 million contract with them to look at treating older kids with gene therapy. So now that's still a work in progress. That, again, and the challenge that we have is trying to define endpoints for the older children, and that's the challenge that any trial is going to have. But I wanted to just kind of point that out, that that is the struggle that we're all up against today. So the fundraising that we did, I mean, we started in 2009. We've done the Pepsi grant and the Vivint grant, and Dr. Gray, you talked about Hannah's Hope. We actually shared the award in Pepsi with Hannah's Hope. We won that. It was an online voting contest. So that was a big driver in kind of moving forward with Abiona and investing in Abiona. Again, we kind of talk about Abiona a lot because Abiona was essentially foundations created. And the one thing that I wanted to touch base on, and I kind of talked about it about this forum, is Kathy Buckley met Tim Miller at a conference in 2012, and that's how that all got started. At that point, Tim was working for another company. He was doing research on gene therapy, and they got together and they started to talk, and that networking drove the creation of Abeona and the gene therapy clinical trial that they're running today. So I can't stress enough how important, these conferences are, as much as you don't think about it. I am the guy who climbs the mountain, so, I did that. I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro in 2012 to kind of raise awareness, and everyone always asks me, why did you climb a mountain? Like, what was your thought? Are you a mountain climber? And my answer is absolutely not. But as we all know, the challenges with these rare diseases like Sanfilippo syndrome or any of the other rare diseases out there is getting the word out and getting people to know about these diseases. And if they're rare, it's hard. If you hold a fundraiser for something like cancer or something like heart disease, there are so many people that are impacted by those. It's easy to get people to rally around. It's easy to create awareness. But what do you do when you have something so rare that doesn't impact people? And that was the challenge that we were really faced with. So I figured I got to do something that's completely crazy. I needed to get people's attention, to have people understand, like, hey, this is out there, and look what this data is doing to try and raise awareness and funding, and it worked. And again, that's a challenge we all have, but that's why we did mountains. So I did Kilimanjaro in 2012. I did Mount Rainier in 2016, and we just came back from Pico de Orizaba in Mexico in March. So we use these mountains kind of as a platform. We drive awareness. It's all about driving awareness. Awareness leads to funding, and then funding leads to moving these trials and getting things going forward. I talked about, we invested, Team Sanfilippo invested in the creation of Abeona. We were one of the founding companies that invested in that. There was a lot of foundations. There's a lot of foundations out there now that have, invested in that worldwide. We talked about Abeona phase 1-2. That's the gene therapy that Michelle talked about, and Tim Miller, I think, actually talked about earlier in the conference. And now, I talked about the Abeona phase 1B. And then another thing that Team Sanfilippo is greatly engaged with, you heard Dr. Schmidt talk earlier today with Armagen and the ERT program that's going on there. So Team Sanfilippo, again, is a driver with funding that research. And, it's important, not that research, but the trials. It's just very important that, while we do fund a lot of research and different programs going on, but at the end of the day, we really need tangible results. We really need to get trials going, and we really need to invest in these. These are just examples of some of the things that we're doing. And, I talked about being united globally. I mean, that's important to get all these foundations together, to work together, to collaborate, and to pull the money together. We talked about Abeona's phase 1B. That was $14 million. That's certainly something that Team Sanfilippo couldn't do on our own. So we had foundations worldwide that made that happen. Next slide I have here is managing the later onset for this is understanding the 3 stages of disease. And this is very important, and I say this is very important because as we move forward with trials, we need to understand the disease, and we need to understand the symptoms of the disease, because if we don't, the pharmaceutical companies that are working on these clinical trials and these therapies can't define endpoints. And if we don't have endpoints, then the FDA is not going to approve what we're trying to do or approve these treatments. So it's very important that we get that data and we understand what the stages are, and we establish criteria and information so we can use that with the companies and with the FDA to move these strategies forward. So I'll just touch on the 3 stages, generally. I actually had a good talk with Dr. Escalars a little bit earlier about, and she's even talking about 4 stages, but the 3 stages that we generally know about is, the typical, the children in the beginning when they're first diagnosed, you get the speech delays, you get the facial abnormalities, you get sinus infections, a lot of the things that a lot of the families and doctors have talked about. And then obviously you get the hyperactivity and the aggression. Stage 2 kind of gets into the sleeplessness. You kind of get the uncontrolled, unprompted crying. The motor skills start to decline. It's kind of that next stage of, okay, now we really know something's going on. And that's a difficult stage. And usually stage 2 is when we start to, see seizures. Usually the children in MPS 3, from a father's experience, it seems that right around puberty is when they start to experience the seizures. So that's, something that kind of comes at that point. My oldest son Ryan, who's 13, he does have seizures. Controlled. We had one just a couple days ago, but that was the first one he had in almost a year. So we seem to be doing pretty good there. And then finally, stage 3, that's when the children really start to decline, when they're starting to lose their ability to walk. They're having trouble eating. Swallowing is always a big issue with these children. And, things start to shut down. Breathing becomes challenging. You talk about feeding tubes. And then, at the end of the disease, any slight infection, pneumonia is usually something that these children get, and then that, that can lead to death. So, again, understanding these stages are very important, again, for the reasons I talked about. So delaying the impacts and progression, and I have the little note at the top, I'm a dad. I'm not a physician, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a researcher. So this is strictly coming from a dad's perspective. Not, I always tell everyone, if you want to try anything that we talk about or anything that we do, always talk to your doctor. Don't try anything on your own. It's very important that you have a licensed physician or a professional, do anything, or you discuss any of this stuff with them. So one of the main things we've seen is, keeping our children ambulatory and active. We think that's very important. We've seen the kids, thrive longer because we keep them moving. The children are very hard to handle. They get large, they run around a lot, so it's, sometimes it's easy to put them in a wheelchair and keep them there, and sometimes you have to. But keeping them going, keeping them walking, keeping them ambulatory and exercising is very important because it keeps the flow in the muscles in the bones and the organs. It keeps the bowels moving. It keeps the chest clear. There's a lot of those things that as you get into stage 2 that keeping them ambulatory is very important. And we do believe that delays the impact if you're using your mind, just with anyone. If you have these children using their mind and using their bodies, it'll delay the onset symptoms, at least what we see, again, from a parent's perspective. Another thing we always talk about is the IEPs at school, which are always a challenge. So you get our children in schools, and a lot of the educators don't understand. You talk about Sanfilippo syndrome, and no one knows what that is. And, you'll have an educator or a professional say, well, your child is just bad. They're just hyper. And no, they're not just bad. I mean, they have this disease, and it's important that we educate them and let them know, this is what we're dealing with so they can help us. And again, we kind of talk about, keeping your kids in school. I mean, it's a personal decision, but I find it's good to keep that social integration with the children. And once the educators know and can provide a safe environment for those children, I think they thrive on interaction with other children and having those experiences. So, it's a tough decision, but what I've seen is keeping my kids in school, at least at this point, is very helpful in doing that. And, we talk about some of the other stuff too, about the visual, the audio, the audible, the sensory, the tactile stimulation. Again, all that stuff is very helpful. As long as they keep using those skills, we think they'll hold on to them longer. Another thing that we always want to do is we want to make sure we're seeing our specialists. We're talking to neurologists, gastroenterologists, orthopedics, pulmonary, just to name a few. Just keeping an eye on the progress and how things are progressing with these children, because we can help them. Again, you're just treating some of the symptoms, but it helps for a quality of life. And if you have these professionals monitoring that for you, it can really help, manage the children as they get older and as they get into the later stages of these diseases. And one of the other things that we believe in is supplements, just medicines that help these children and vitamins. Because it's a metabolic disorder, they don't function the way we do. So some of the minerals and vitamins we have in our body that we can keep normal levels, they have trouble keeping. So, we always go with our children, and my kids go every 6 months and get blood workups just to see what their vitamin levels are. Are they deficient in vitamin C, vitamin D? Those are things that I give my children, which again would helps with some of the symptoms and helps again with this disease. So it's very important to make sure that you're keeping an eye on that and keeping an eye on where these children are. And then obviously supplements can help as you get into stage 2, and it's sometimes even in stage 1, the diarrhea and the constipation is always a challenge for all the parents. And we use things like magnesium and vitamin C and sometimes Miralax in cases to try and help these children, again, with some of these symptoms. Lastly, this is a kind of a topic that's a little bit, debatable, is a genistein. Now, I use genistein for my children. You'll talk to some doctors who will say it doesn't work, but there are published studies out there that show that genistein will help reduce the heparin sulfate and the neuroinflammation. So, I find it's something that can be expensive, but it is something that can help my children. So I give them, we do give that to them, again, whether it's proven it helps it's kind of up in the air, but I feel if it's something that could help my children, I'm going to give it to them. And we really haven't seen any crazy side effects with anything like genistein. And then miglustat is another thing that we're looking at, just to kind of, these are things that you can do to kind of reduce that lysosomal storage. And again, that'll delay the onsets of the disease. And that's what we're trying to do. And I think it's also important to kind of point out that, every child reacts different. I have 2 kids, and Ryan's 13 and Braden 10, and they react different to some things. They're brothers from the same parents, and some of the things we give them, they'll react differently. So, that's important, that every child doesn't react the same to this, and that's why it's also, important to talk with your physicians and your doctors to make sure that we're monitoring anything that we do with our children. Weight loss is, again, it's another big challenge that we have when we start to get later, and the children have trouble eating. You get liver function reduction, spleen deficiency, and then, in a later onset, you get feeding tubes. So, again, that's something that we work with, nutritionists and things to kind of help our kids. And, my oldest son, Ryan, he still eats fine. And again, I think it comes down to, can we get him a feeding tube at that point? It's always a very tough decision to try and figure out, when's the right time to do it. But as I see it, again, if it's something they continue to do, they continue to eat by mouth, I think they'll hold on to that function longer if they continue to do that. So again, I'm a big advocate in, continue to an extent where it's safe. Obviously, if they're aspirating on food or something along those lines, then it's not, at that point it's not safe. But as long as, again, we continue to do it, we hope to be able to put that off. Intracranial pressure is another one that we kind of really have struggled with. I just had my son Ryan in the ER on last Saturday night. We had a storm from the East Coast, and the pressure was really low. And we like to use these barometric pressure balls that have the fluid in them. And when the pressure drops, you can see the water in the ball raise up. Again, I'm not a doctor, but we kind of see our children when this happens. That's the pressure in their brain kind of builds up. It allows liquid to build up or fluid to build up in their brain, which causes pressure, which causes them pain and uncomfortable. So it just seems very ironic that when the pressure drops, that all our kids seem to display symptoms of uncomfortable and pain. So that's something we watch, and we've been using Diamox. That's something that we use to try and help with that. Again, that's something you obviously want to talk to your doctor about, but Diamox is something that helps reduce pressure, and we've found it to be somewhat successful with these kids. And again, managing these symptoms of that intracranial pressure. Pain management, again, another big one. You've heard a lot of folks talk about it. One of the things that I want to look into as a dad now is the CBD oils. It seems to have been very beneficial in a lot of different diseases and a lot of different things with pain management. So it's something we want to definitely look into. And then finally, seizures. It's something, that I've seen with my son. If he's up and he's in pain and he doesn't sleep, it seems like a trigger point to me. It's something that, again, that I've seen to kind of notice in other families when we talk to parents seem to kind of think the same thing. And, there's numerous medications you can use to treat seizures. My son's on Keppra, but Keppra depletes vitamin V, so vitamin B6. So I give him a vitamin B6 supplement. So some of these things that you use, again, you have to do under the care of a healthcare professional to make sure you're looking at different things. So I think I'm going to end it there. I just wanted to kind of go through some of those. We do have a video documentary. It's called theweightofammountain.com. It kind of documents my climb on Mount Kilimanjaro, or not Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Rainier in 2016, and we're actually doing a sequel, which Dr. Gray is going to be a part of, our Pico de Orizaba climb. But that's kind of in the works. But it just kind of explains, it's a documentary that kind of explains the journey of a parent and families of how this disease works. So without any further ado, I'll end it there. I just want to thank you all for your time and for listening to me. And I hope you have a great rest of your time here and a safe travel back to your home. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. That concludes our session. Lunch is being served out in the pavilion. Again, I want to thank Dr. Harmatz, Dr. Gray, Dr. Bjoraker, Melissa Hogan, and Carl Kapes for rounding off some of the information regarding the related diseases and the unmet need of our patient population. So thank you.